Jeffrey Epstein was many things: a disgraced financier, a convicted sex offender, and a man surrounded by mystery. But newly released U.S. Department of Justice documents now reveal another side of Epstein that raises troubling questions. His repeated attempts to position himself near the center of Russian political power, even trying to reach President Vladimir Putin himself. For years, Epstein presented himself not just as a wealthy businessman, but as a behind-the-scenes geopolitical operator, someone who claimed he could interpret world leaders, influence policy, and open doors that were closed to almost everyone else. Whether those claims were real, exaggerated, or entirely fabricated remains unclear, but what is now undeniable is this: Epstein was actively pursuing relationships with senior Russian officials at some of the most sensitive moments in modern global politics. A message meant for the Kremlin. The story begins in June 2018. At the time, Epstein was already a convicted sex offender in the United States. Yet, despite his criminal past, he continued to move in elite international circles, communicating with politicians, billionaires, and former heads of state. According to newly released DOJ files, Epstein sent an email on June 24, 2018, to Norwegian politician Thorbjorn Jagland, who was then serving as Secretary General of the Council of Europe. In that email, Epstein made an unusual request. He suggested that Jagland pass a message to Vladimir Putin, specifically proposing that Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, should speak directly with him. Epstein referenced a previous Russian official he claimed to have known well, Vitaly Churkin, Russia's longtime ambassador to the United Nations, who had died suddenly in 2017. Epstein wrote that Churkin had used to speak with him regularly and suggested that those conversations helped Churkin better understand then-President Donald Trump.
The implication was clear. Epstein believed he could offer insight, access, or strategic value to Moscow. Jagland replied that he would meet with Lavrov's assistant the following week and would suggest the idea. Who was Vitaly Churkin, and why did Epstein matter? Vitaly Churkin was not a minor figure. As Russia's ambassador to the United Nations for over a decade, he was one of Moscow's most visible and influential diplomats, particularly during crises involving Syria, Ukraine, and U.S.-Russia relations. Epstein claimed that he met with Churkin frequently in New York. The documents further reveal that Epstein even offered to help Churkin's son, Maxim, secure a job at a wealth management firm in New York. There is no public evidence confirming the depth or frequency of these meetings, but Epstein clearly wanted others to believe that he had been trusted by someone at the heart of Russian diplomacy. And after Churkin's death, Epstein seemed eager to replace that connection with another, positioning himself as a global power broker. Epstein's email to Jagland included a telling line. He wrote that Churkin understood Trump after their conversations, and that the situation is not complex. Epstein added that leaders must be seen to get something. In other words, Epstein was presenting himself as someone who understood political psychology, how leaders think, how influence works, and how deals are made. To analysts, this language suggests not espionage, but something else: a man desperate to appear indispensable. According to experts who reviewed the documents, Epstein consistently attempted to portray himself as a unique intermediary, someone who could translate between power centers. But there is little evidence that world leaders actually relied on him. Rising international alarm. The release of these documents triggered political reactions beyond the United States. In Poland, Prime Minister Donald Tusk made a startling announcement during a cabinet meeting. He said Poland would launch an investigation into Epstein's possible ties to Russian intelligence services. Tusk warned that if Russian intelligence had any role in Epstein's network, it would represent a severe national security threat, not just to Poland, but to Western democracies more broadly. He suggested that compromising material might exist involving powerful figures still active today. These comments fueled global speculation. However, no intelligence agency has publicly confirmed that Epstein worked for or was controlled by Russian intelligence. The Kremlin responds. The Kremlin moved quickly to shut down the speculation. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov dismissed the idea that Epstein was linked to Russian intelligence as unserious. He told reporters not to waste time on such theories. Russian officials have consistently denied any improper relationship with Epstein. Analysts urge caution. Security analysts interviewed by CNN and other outlets urge restraint. They say the documents do not prove that Epstein was a spy, an agent, or even particularly successful. Instead, the evidence points to a man who relentlessly chased influence, attaching himself to powerful people and exaggerating his importance. In many cases, Epstein appears to have been talking more than acting. Claims of access to Vladimir Putin. Epstein's ambitions to reach the Kremlin did not begin in 2018. As far back as 2013, he was already trying to engineer an introduction to Vladimir Putin. On May 9, 2013, Epstein emailed former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. He wrote that Yagland was scheduled to meet Putin in Sochi later that month, and that Yagland had asked whether Epstein would be available to meet the Russian president. Epstein claimed he could explain how Russia might structure deals to attract Western investment. Days later, Jagland emailed Epstein saying he planned to pass along a message, that he had a friend who could be useful to Putin. Epstein responded enthusiastically. He described Putin as being in a unique position to do something grand, comparing the moment to the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik during the Cold War. Epstein even insisted on strict conditions. Any meeting must last at least 2 to 3 hours, in private. There is no evidence that such a meeting ever happened. Grand claims, no proof. In a later email to Barak, Epstein claimed, without evidence, that he had declined a request to meet Putin during a Russian economic conference in St. Petersburg. He said that if Putin truly wanted to meet him, the meeting would require real time and privacy. It remains unclear whether Putin ever requested such a meeting at all. CNN has said it could not independently verify Epstein's claims. Emails suggesting a planned meeting. In July 2014, another email surfaced that raised eyebrows. Joy Ito, then director of the MIT Media Lab, wrote to Epstein that he could not convince LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman to change his schedule to go meet Putin with Epstein. Ito later apologized for his association with Epstein and for accepting Epstein-linked funding. Again, the email suggests Epstein was telling others that meetings with world leaders were imminent, whether or not that was true. Sensitive timing in U.S.-Russia relations. Many of Epstein's Russian contacts occurred during periods of extreme geopolitical tension. By 2016, U.S. intelligence agencies had accused Russia of interfering in the American presidential election. Trust between Washington and Moscow was at a post-Cold War low. Yet in June 2018, Jagland emailed Epstein saying he hoped to stay at Epstein's Paris residence after meetings in Moscow with Putin, Lavrov, and then Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. Epstein replied that he was sorry not to be with Jagland to meet the Russians. Shortly afterward, Norway's financial crimes unit Økokrim announced it had opened an investigation into Jagland based on information in the Epstein files. Jagland has denied any wrongdoing. A friend with intelligence ties. The documents also show Epstein describing a close relationship with Sergei Belyakov. Belyakov graduated from Russia's FSB Academy, the successor to the KGB, and later ran the St. Petersburg Economic Forum Foundation. Epstein called him "my very good friend" in a 2015 email to venture capitalist Peter Thiel. Epstein offered to introduce Thiel to Belyakov and help connect Western investors to Russian projects. The St. Petersburg Economic Forum Epstein played a role in arranging visits to Russia's most important business conference, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. After attending in 2015, Ehud Barak emailed Epstein thanking him for organizing the trip. Barak later said his invitations came directly from Putin's office and that Epstein never formally raised his name with the Kremlin. Russian oligarchs and U.S. politics. Epstein also claimed to advise sanctioned Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska. In 2018, Epstein forwarded correspondence about Deripaska to Steve Bannon, writing that he was keeping him in the loop. Deripaska has denied knowing Epstein personally. There is no confirmed evidence the two ever met. Travel to Russia. Flight logs released by the Justice Department confirm Epstein traveled to Russia. In November 2002, Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell flew from Copenhagen to Moscow on Epstein's private jet, then on to St. Petersburg. They departed Russia 2 days later for Ireland. A photograph later surfaced showing Epstein in Sarov, a closed nuclear research city, standing outside physicist Andrei Sakharov's former residence. The image underscores Epstein's fascination with science, power, and secrecy. His final attempts. Even in 2018 and early 2019, just months before his arrest on federal sex trafficking charges, Epstein was still applying for Russian visas. Emails show his team attempting to transfer his visa to a new passport. He was still looking outward, even as legal pressure closed in. The central question. So what was Jeffrey Epstein really doing? Was he an intelligence asset? A manipulator? Or simply a man obsessed with power, exaggerating his importance? The documents do not provide definitive answers. What they do reveal is a disturbing pattern. A convicted criminal persistently attempting to embed himself among the world's most powerful figures. Despite years of effort, there is no evidence that Epstein ever met Vladimir Putin. But his attempts, and the people willing to engage with him, raise profound questions about access, accountability, and the blind spots of global elites.